also suitable with slight changes. You can use this to insert multiple records via Odata service. So the next 2-3 sessions will be based on this. Inserting header plus item records via Odata service from front-end Fury app. And the same application with just one slight change, you can insert multiple records via Odata service. Okay, so this application will use backend Odata service with create deep entity method implementation. In order to do this, we are going to implement create deep entity method implementation at Odata service level. Whether you want to insert header plus item records or you can insert multiple records, but ultimately backend Odata service should have create deep entity method implementation. Create deep entity method is most suitable for dealing with header plus item records, and it also can deal with multiple records via Odata service. So first we'll focus on the front-end side, screen development. So let me write step-by-step procedure here. So what I want to do is, first I want to make you understand the basic diagram. At a view level, I want to create a simple form. I want to create simple form. This is to accept header record from end user. Thus, I want to create table. This is to accept item records from end user. Form is for accepting input. Table is also for accepting input. Earlier, we have created table to display the output, but today we are going to create table for accepting input. And I want to create button. When user click on this button, I want to insert header record by capturing from simple form, as well as I want to insert item records by accepting item records from table. When user click on a button here. So at view level, I want to create simple form in order to accept input header record. Simple form in order to accept input header record. And I want to create table. Table is for accepting input item records. Table, the purpose is to accept input item records. It can be one or many records. And the purpose of button is just to trigger the backend Odata service. By capturing the front-end values, I want to trigger backend Odata service. So this button is for event handler implementation. Button is to trigger event handler implementation. So inside this event handler, what exactly we are going to do is we are going to capture header record. Inside this event handler, we will try to capture header record from simple form. I'll just give the overview, but the event handler implementation, we are going to do it in the next session tomorrow. Time will not be sufficient. So event handler implementation, we are going to do it tomorrow, but let me just give the overview. Capture header record from simple form. And we are going to capture item records from table. We're going to capture item records from table. And not only that, we need to assign header record to data object. We need to assign header record to data object because I want to send header record to the backend service. So put your header record inside data object. Not only header record, you need to assign item records. You need to assign item records to same data object, but with navigation property. You have to assign item records to the same data object, but you have to differentiate by using navigation property. And finally, use Odata model. Consume Odata service. Use Odata model in order to consume Odata service. And finally, we have to trigger create front-end method to execute create deep entity method of Odata service. Finally, trigger create front-end method. Create front-end method in order to execute create deep entity method of backend Odata service. This create deep entity method of backend service will insert multiple records, or it can insert header plus item records simultaneously. So that's the overall approach we have to follow. First, we'll focus on view level development. That's a front-end development. I want to create simple form to accept input header record. I want to create a table such that it can accept item records. And I want to create button to trigger event handler. So this event handler implementation, we'll try to do it in the next session. So this we'll try to do it in fourth view. We'll try to develop this application from fourth view point of view. Okay, so step one, we'll try to open fourth view. In our example, already fourth view is created. So just open that fourth view.xml file. So I want to create simple form, so better register the library. On top section of a view. Register the library on top section of a view. So there is fourth view in our application. So let me go to that fourth view. Fourth view contains default content area and it contains some text in this case. Let us not worry about the text. Inside this fourth view, my expectation is to create simple form, table, as well as button. Simple form for accepting header record. Table is for accepting item records. And button is to trigger event handler. So that event handler can execute backend Odata service method. So this is what we are going to do. But in this case, button table belongs to sap.m library. Button table belongs to sap.m library. sap.m is a default library, it's already registered. But for simple form, we have to use a separate library that should be registered here. XML-NS, you can use form SAP UI layout.form. That's a library for making use of simple form screen element or a simple form container. So step 1 is just register this. In fourth view, view.xml file, SAP UI layout.form, that's a library you can register. And inside fourth view, this is what we are going to do. Simple form, table, and a button. Earlier, table is created for displaying the output records, but in this case, we are going to use table for accepting inputs. So table can be used for input as well as for output. Earlier, table is used for displaying output, but now we can use table for accepting input. Let us do that. So register library SAP UI layout.form inside fourth view. So that is basically step 1. Now step 2. Open fourth view. Already we are in fourth view, so just open that fourth view.xml file inside page content area. Inside page content area, what you need to do is create simple form. Create table, create button. Let me just give some basic note here. This simple form is for accepting input, header record according to this scenario. Table is for accepting input item records. And button is to trigger backend Odata service functionality. For triggering backend Odata service, create deep entity method. That's ultimate goal in this scenario. But to do all these things, just implement this code. So let us focus on fourth view. So here I want to create a form. That is simple form. For this, let me provide some title. This is to accept new header record. Use some layouts. And you can use some width. Width for simple form can be used. For example, 800 pixel. Now let me use some collection of labels. with some text. Can use text direction. Design. So let me take some collection of labels. And these labels, first label is for accepting header record user ID. Second label is for like accepting header record first name. And this is like header record last name, header record email ID, header record country, and header record phone number, etc. So for accepting input, we have to create input field. And for each input field, better to use ID property because input fields, we are going to use it for capturing the values in the event handler. So for each label, you try to provide an input field with some value property, ID property, and some width. So width, let me use, for example, 200 pixel. I want to create input field. And for each input field, there should be ID property. That is important. Because I want to capture input header record values from all these input fields. Let me provide some ID. So ID is provided for every input field here. Okay, so just create a simple form in this manner. So inside fourth view, we are trying to do this. Fourth view, view.xml file. Simple form is created here. With all these options. But the most important is each input field contains ID property here. That we are going to use it in the next session to capture the values from these respective input fields. The purpose of this entire simple form is just to accept header record from end user. Simple form to accept input header record. That's the purpose of this simple form. Okay, so let me check whether this simple form is reflected or not. Let me save and run this. So let me go to fourth view directly. Okay, so here there is a button directly to go to fourth view. So in fourth view, now you can see there is a form that is to accept a new header record with respect to all these input fields. So form is created successfully. Let us focus on table. Table should accept item records from end user. Table is not for display output. In this example, table is for accepting input. So let us create table that is to accept input item records. In the same fourth view, we have to do this. So let me add table related code. So use table begin tag, end tag. Okay, for table, use ID. We have to use this table in the controller event handler. In the next session, we are going to capture the values from this table. We are going to capture input item records from the table. So make sure that there is ID. For example, my items table. And you can use aggregation property items. Table items is aggregation property. For that, you can use, as of now, let us use just data here as an entity set. And then you can use width, example, 800 pixel. For this table, there will be two sections, columns and items. Items contains internal skin element as column list item. This is same like what we used to do earlier. Inside column list item, there is aggregation property cells. This is what we used to do earlier. Column section, item section. Item section with column list item. Column list item contains cells as aggregation property. Now here in column section, let us provide some column with a label. Column label. Text, for example, this is to accept item record. In this case, common field is user ID. So let us use some label text as user ID. Then product ID. Then product price, product name. I want to use these fields accepting item records with product ID, product name, product price. These are just column labels. So four column labels are used. First field is a common field. So user ID will exist in simple form as well as table. For items, we are using product ID, product name, and product price. Now in cell section, we have to use text skin element is basically for displaying the output. For accepting input, you have to use cells with input skin element with value property. Input skin element for accepting input, use it with value property. So let me use 4 input fields in cell section. And here you need to maintain data binding with same field names as backend item data fields. Backend item data fields contains common field user ID, then product ID, product name, product price. You have to use data binding with same backend Odata fields for items, product ID, product name, product price. These are the backend Odata fields. In the next session, we'll try to come to that backend service. But here, as of now, we are just maintaining data binding with item data fields which are similar to the Odata service. Product ID, product name, and product price. These are case sensitive. This backend OData fields must match with this front-end input field value property data bindings. So this is how you can create a table that is for accepting item records. Now let me run this. If you run this, let me go to fourth screen, fourth view. In fourth view, you can see a table is created here with user ID, product name, product price, but the input fields are not displayed to accept input data. It is not enabling a table to accept input data, but the table layout is created here. Now what I want to do is I want to enable this table such that by default it will accept 5 item records. You can accept n number of item records, you can make it dynamic, but as of now I want to enable this table to accept 5 item records. So there should be 5 empty rows for this table. So in fourth view, view.xml file, so the table is created here, and these things are important. And for this table, items is aggregation property. For that, you can use data. That's a default entity set. So here we are using input field inside this cell section of a table. This is for accepting input data. In this case, input item records. So the table is created. The table for accepting input item records. And here we are trying to maintain data bindings. Maintain data bindings with item data fields of Odata service. Data binding should be maintained on a similar lines with respect to item data fields of Odata service. These field names must match with backend item data fields. This is like fourth view table. This is for accepting input item records. Now here, when you run this, the table is displayed as a tabular format, but it is not enabled for accepting input data as of now. I want to enable this table to accept, for example, default 5 empty, by default for 5 item records. For accepting 5 item records, there should be 5 empty rows inside this table. So in this table, I want to enable 5 empty rows so that 5 item records can be provided by end user. I want to enable 5 empty rows so that an end user can provide item records, item record 1, 2, 3, etc. With respect to these fields. As a developer, we need to enable default empty rows so that the end user can provide the actual item records so that those records can be transferred to the backend system via Odata service. So the purpose here is to initialize 5 empty rows in this case now. You can have a number of empty rows, but as of now, for our application, let us make default 5 empty rows so that 5 item records can be accepted. Create 5 empty rows so that user can provide 5 item records by default. So for that reason, we have to manage the front end side. This table has to be managed in the front end to enable 5 empty rows so that user can provide item records. So the front end side, we can manage this table by using a JSON model. We can create some JSON model. Create one JSON model for front end management. In JSON model, you can assign an array. Array can have empty rows, and that JSON model can be assigned to a view. That means it can be assigned to a table of this view. So to create JSON model to manage the front end side table, provide an array. In this case, provide array with 5 empty rows, and the JSON model can be assigned to a view. That means it can be applied to a table. So this is what we need to manage. So to do this, we'll try to use onInit initialization method. To do this, we'll try to use onInit initialization method of a 4th view. So let me go to onInit method. Okay, first let me copy these lines. Okay. Let me create button also, then we can go to that. So according to our requirement diagram, let me create button as well. And we'll try to assign event handler. After that, we'll try to go with onInit method. So let me use one label, a dummy label. But here I want to create button. Text, for example, insert header plus items. If you don't use form, then this can be used for inserting multiple records. If you're not using form, use just only table and button, then this can be used for inserting multiple records. If you are using form along with the table, then you can use it for inserting header plus items simultaneously. Okay, accept is a type of the button. Let me use width, for example, 300 pixel, and we'll try to assign event handler to press event. For button, button contains press event. For that, you can assign event handler. For example, insert header items event handler. Provide some event handler, that is, for example, insert header items So this is a button label input. Sorry, insert header plus items. That's a button label. Type of the button is accept. Width 300 pixel. Press is the event. For that, we are assigning event handler. Insert header items So this event handler we are going to implement in 4th view controller. Button belongs to 4th view. So implement event handler in 4th view controller. 4th view controller, you can see by default, nothing is available. Here you can add that event handler by using function statement. So this we'll try to implement tomorrow. That is event handler implementation. As of now, button is created with event handler, and that event handler we are going to implement in fourth view controller. Okay, so now let us focus on the table with empty rows. This table should have empty rows. Of course, a button is created. Button contains event handler. Now let us focus back on table. So table should have some empty rows so that user can provide item records. So for that reason, I'm going to fourth view. Okay, let me copy all these lines. Form, table, button. All these lines you have to implement in fourth view.xml file. Form, table, button. So that code is provided here. Now let us focus on step 3. So you can open fourth view controller .js file, and you can open on init method, initialization method. And our purpose is to implement the code. The purpose is to implement and initialize. It is to initialize default 5 empty row objects or 5 empty rows in a table via JSON model, because empty rows we have to add in a table. That is for front-end processing. For front-end processing, we have to add some empty rows. So that front-end activity, you can do it through JSON model. When you want to send the data to backend through event handler, that we are going to do it with the help of Odata model. That we are going to do it in the next session. I want to insert data in the backend. At that level, Odata model comes into picture. But at this point of time, I want to have a table with empty rows for front-end activity. So you can initialize 5 empty rows in a table via JSON model. JSON model is for front-end activity. For back-end activity, we can use Odata model. That also will come at later stage. So front-end side, we have to use JSON model to initialize some empty rows to a table. There is no meaning in getting empty records from backend to frontend. There is no meaning in getting empty rows from backend to frontend using Odata model. Empty rows you can create in a table. In the frontend side, frontend processing, you can use JSON model. Right, so here we are going to implement some code inside onInit method to initialize 5 empty rows in a table through JSON model. So let me go to fourth view controller. Fourth view controller also contains onInit method. You can uncomment this. So there is onInit method already available. So inside this onInit method, our purpose is to initialize 5 empty rows in a table screen element via JSON model, because this is just for front-end activity. Once after accepting input, we can send those values to the backend through JSON, through Odata model. Backend activity comes into picture at later stage. That will happen through Odata model. But as of today, we are trying to initialize 5 empty rows in a table through JSON model. JSON model is a front-end model. So front-end side, we need to manage this. So what we can do is we can hard code it. For example, I want to use item row object. You can make it like item row object 1, for example. I want to create item row object. In this case, I want to create item row object 1. Row object means you can create an object by using flower brackets here. You can create empty row object by using flower bracket here. And that empty row object should have some fields with empty record values. So for that, you can use the first field, user ID, and you can make it blank. The second field, that is product ID, you can make it blank. Third field is something like product name, and make it blank. And fourth field is product price, and make it blank. So here we are trying to create empty row object by using all these fields using flower brackets. Flower brackets means it's an object. In that object, we are creating a row with respect to all these fields. So for that, you can use user ID colon some empty value. First name colon some empty value. Sorry, product ID, product name, product price, all these things are provided with some empty values here inside an object. We are calling this as an object because we are using flower brackets here. Flower brackets indicates an object. In this case, I want to have an empty object with empty field values. So that's the reason why you can use all those fields. You can mention all those fields like this, and each field with blank value. Now, similarly, I want to use item row object 2. That item row object 2 also should have some empty record values. Similarly, let me add item row object 3, some empty record values. Item row object 4, similarly item row object 5 with empty row object with respect to all these fields. So now we are trying to create 5 item row objects. All 5 item row objects are empty row objects here. All 5 item row objects are empty at this point of time. Now, if I use like this, some X variable, if I use flower brackets, then that is considered as an object. That is considered as an object. But that object should have field values. So that's the reason why we are using user ID, product name, product price, etc. Then it becomes an object with empty row if you use blank values here. It becomes object with empty rows, empty row if you use blank values here. In the same manner, we have created 5 empty item row objects in this case. Now what we need to do is, you have to put all these things in one separate array. After initializing or after declaring 5 empty row objects, you put all these empty row objects in one array and you assign that array to JSON model. Very simple. So here you can use var something like data array. Array is declared by using square brackets. Array is declared by using square brackets here. Don't forget that. So within the square brackets, why don't you pass all these item row objects? Item row object 1, item row object 2, 3, 4, and 5. In this case, data array is an array. Array is declared with square brackets. Inside that square brackets, we are assigning item row object 1, row object 2, row object 3, 4, and 5. So row objects are assigned. Item row objects are assigned to an array in this case by using square brackets here. So that means data array at this stage contains an array with 5 empty row objects. Data array is an array with 5 empty item row objects here. Now what you need to do, you need to assign this 5 empty rows to a table. You have to assign these 5 empty rows to a table using this array. You cannot use array directly to a table. The problem here is you cannot assign array directly to table. You have to assign array to a table using a JSON model. We cannot assign array with row objects to table directly. That is not possible. What we need to do is we can assign array with row objects to a table using JSON model. That should be done through JSON model. So that's the reason why let us create one JSON model here. So where JSON model, new SAP UI model.json model, and JSON model here you can use something like data property. You can use one data property here. For data property, you can assign this data array. Data property, you can assign data array. Data array internally contains what? An array with 5 empty row objects according to our code. So here we are using data array with 5 empty row objects, and that data array we are assigning it to JSON model. So for data property of JSON model, we are assigning 5 empty row objects. And that assignment of 5 empty row objects is assigned by using array. In our case, what is that array name? The array name is data array. That is what we have declared in the last line. So data array is assigned to JSON model. That means internally 5 empty row objects are assigned to JSON model. Now what you can do is you have to assign this JSON model to a table. You have to assign this JSON model to a table. Table is part of fourth view. So directly you can use this dot get view. It will access fourth view. For that fourth view, you can use set model. Set model is a common method. And for fourth view, I want to assign JSON model. JSON model is applicable for table because fourth view contains a table. So let us assign JSON model here. So fourth view table is assigned with JSON model. JSON model internally contains data array. Data array internally contains 5 empty row objects. And 5 empty row objects are declared here manually. Fourth view table is assigned with JSON model. JSON model internally contains data array. Data array internally contains 5 empty row objects. All 5 empty row objects are declared here manually. So now let me run this. So let me go to fourth view directly. Now fourth view contains form with header record, and you can see table for accepting item records. 5 empty row objects are created here. 5 empty row objects are created so that user can provide 5 item records by default. Okay, so here let me provide some title also for this table. The text. Just assign the text. Now you can see form is for accepting header record. Now you can have a table. Table contains 5 empty rows that can be used for accepting item records. And there is a button. When you click button, the backend Odata service functionality has to be executed. So header record, for example, you can provide like this. Now here, when you provide item records, the common field is user ID. You want, you can make a default automatic here. As soon as you provide user ID here, you can assign those values if required here. That we can make it dynamic later. But now product ID, you can make, for example, P1 desktop 80,000. P2, for example, product ID P2 item name, that is product name, you can make it laptop, for example, 50,000. P3 tablets, for example, 30,000. P4 mouse, and P5, for example, mobile. Right, so here, now this is a screen. Fourth screen is accepting header record through form, and it is also accepting item records through a table. Table internally contains 5 empty rows. Because of that, we are able to provide item records on the screen. Now, when user click on a button, it has to trigger Odata service create deep entity method. And as a developer, you need to pass all these values. You need to pass header record to backend. You need to pass item records also to the backend. Okay, so here, this is how the form and table is created along with a button. So this is accepting header record, and this is accepting item records. And when user click on a button here, when user click on a button, it has to trigger the backend functionality. So what we are going to do is we are going to capture header record from simple form. An input header record. And not only that, we are going to capture item records from table. And then when you capture header record from simple form, you need to assign header record. You need to assign header record to data object. And when you capture item records, you need to assign item records to data object navigation property. Whatever item records you capture, that item records you need to assign to data object navigation property. Navigation property is a reference to items. Now that means data object contains header record, data object with navigation property contains item records. Everything will come to data object. That should be the final point in the front end side. And that data object, you need to send it to the backend system via Odata service. After executing all these lines, I can simply say that data object contains header record, data object with navigation property contains item records. So finally, data object contains everything. The data object should be transferred to the backend Odata service. Odata service will trigger create deep entity method, and it will insert header plus item records. So that is how we are going to manage So this data object technically contains ultimately data object contains header plus items. That is how you need to pass from front end to the back end. This data object is passed to backend system. That means Odata service. With the help of Odata model. With the help of Odata model, we are going to pass data object to Odata service, and we are going to trigger create deep entity method of Odata service. It will internally trigger create deep entity method of Odata service. That's how the overall approach for this entire application. So data object should be passed to the backend system Odata service. Odata service create deep entity method will trigger the complete functionality in the backend. So capture header record, put it inside data object. Capture item records, put it inside data object with navigation property. Now data object, in simple words, data object contains both header plus items. That's how you need to manage. And that data object should be passed to Odata service using Odata model. Odata service will execute create deep entity method of backend Odata service. It will insert header plus items into different tables in the backend level. So this functionality we are going to implement in the next session. Time will not be sufficient. Let me just save this. It's just like go to view screen, form, table, button, and functionality overview. Okay, so step 3, we have implemented some code that is just to initialize 5 empty rows. Let me explain this. Okay, first, let me give some basic idea here. What exactly we have done in onInit method. Let me take the screenshot. So here inside onInit method, we are just creating 5 empty row objects here. We are using flower brackets for each row object. We are using flower bracket. Flower bracket means it's an object. In that object, we are initializing the field values with blank. Field values with blank. So technically, this becomes empty row objects. These are 5 empty row objects here. So create 5 empty row objects. After that, all row objects, row object 1, row object 2, row object 3, 4, and 5, all these things are assigned to an array by using square brackets. All these things are assigned by using square brackets here. So that means we are assigning empty row objects to an array. That means we are assigning all the row objects to an array. This is technically an array. Assign, in this case, 5 empty row objects to an array. In our case, we are using data array. You can give any name. Array name can be XYZ array. It doesn't matter. Just it is for data purpose, so we are using it as data array. Array name can be anything, XYZ array. In our case, we are using data array. That means all 5 empty row objects are assigned to data array. Now here we are trying to create JSON model and assigning data array to JSON model. Okay, so here we are creating JSON model and we are assigning data array to JSON model. So create JSON model and assign data array to JSON model. Create JSON model and assign data array to JSON model. So this is what we are trying to do here. Put it in single line. Now here we are trying to assign JSON model to a view. That means it will be assigned to a table. We are assigning JSON model to table is 4th view. Why? Because here you can see data property is used on a table, aggregation property. That's JSON model also we are using data aggregation property here. Table, when it is created, it contains items aggregation property with data. So JSON model also contains data here. That's a common factor. So that's the reason why JSON model will be assigned to a table. Because table contains data as aggregation property, configuration with data property for items aggregation property. That's a common factor here. You can notice that. Table contains items. Items is associated with the data here. The data is technically related to JSON model here. So because of that, JSON model is technically assigned to a 4th view, but 4th view contains a table which is configured with data. So that means JSON model is assigned to a table. Okay, so these are the 4 lines you need to implement in onInit method. Empty row objects, data array, JSON model, assign JSON model to table. Fourth view controller onInit method implementation. Okay, so here these are the code is implemented. Now step 4. Step 4 is implement event handler. That means here you can open fourth view controller.js file. Implement event handler. That is this one. Insert header items event handler. That is to implement that event handler by using function keyword, and within flower brackets we have to write the functionality here. This implementation should be done. So as of now, just let me make a comment here. We'll implement functionality next session. That is what we are going to continue. Step 5. If you want to test at this level, you can go for step 5. Save all the files and run the app, and you can check the screen whether form table button is loaded or not. At this point of time, you can run the app and check the screen. If the screen is ready, then you can implement this event handler in the next session. So we'll try to continue that. Time will not be sufficient. I'll stop here. Tomorrow we'll discuss that. Okay.